The Business Channel for business class programming.
With me now is Terry Scuoler from the EEF, the Manufacturers Organisation. First of all, can I ask you, manufacturing is on the up, but is that because they're more competitive in Britain, or is it just because of a weak pound?
Manufacturing is on the up because of a combination of both the competitive pound and I think the ability of manufacturing leaders to take advantage of the recovery. The competitive pound has undoubtedly helped since the latter part of 2008. But British manufacturing leaders have demonstrated the resilience. They've kept labour force and skills during that recession, and through the process of innovation, they've demonstrated that they can take advantage of these recovering and emerging export markets.
Now, which sort of manufacturer is doing particularly well? Which of your members is driving the revival?
I'm pleased to report that all sectors across manufacturing are performing well. There's the possibility of a downside here in terms of construction. Construction came out of the recession slower than the other parts of the sectors, and of course it's patchy. But other than that, this is across the board. Difficult to highlight any particular part of the sector, but if I was to, I'd probably quote mechanical, heavy investment, mechanical engineering, perhaps linked of course to those growing, emerging and export markets.
Now, can I ask you about UKTI? Can you say a bit about what they are and what they do, and what do you think they add?
UKTI is a government body supporting British companies in the main in exporting, and I think they've got quite a good reputation. They've got a strong regional network in the UK, and of course through the embassy and consul network overseas they offer support to British manufacturers. Our survey shows that of about 50% of our members that are aware of the UKTI, they speak very highly of it. I think the issue that we've got, of course, is that penetration is only 50%, and they and we can do more to make manufacturers aware of the service.
What's the role, do you think, that engineers are playing in finding solutions to major challenges like climate change?
The role of engineers is, I believe, absolutely critical. I think it's probably not much of an exaggeration to say that almost every solution that we face is being addressed and can be found by engineers. Whether it's, I think as you're aware, climate change, whether it's the ageing population, engineers are at the back of that. Mobility products for our ageing population, much of the waste reduction, carbon reduction that we're required to meet in terms of our environmental regulation and legislation. All of that has been driven by engineers through research and development, and of course from that applied product development. And I'm pleased to say that we are very much to the fore here in the UK.
How attractive do you think manufacturing is as an activity in its own right? Isn't it better to find a high value idea and then let someone else make it?
I think there are two issues there in terms of describing the attractiveness of manufacturing. I think one is we have to recognise that over the last couple of decades, manufacturing has not had a particularly attractive or good image, and I think it would be wrong of us not to recognise that. But I believe that is changing, and I believe it's changing quite strongly as a result, in part from that recession. I think the other point you make is of course linked to where manufacturing should take place. Manufacturing is a great wealth generator. About 53% of our exports come from manufacturing, about 70% of our research and development in business comes from manufacturing, and of course it's a double positive whammy when we export what we've got here. And I think there is a clear link, whether or not we wish to face up to it or not, there is a clear link that where research and development is undertaken in the main, that tends to be where the manufacturing or production takes place.
I mean, it can't be denied, though, that labour costs are so much cheaper in other countries, like in the Far East. And how can we compete on manufacturing if we're having to pay so much more for labour?
You're absolutely right. Labour costs, of course, are cheaper in the Far East and indeed in other parts of the world. But cost is only one aspect of competitiveness. Quality is clearly a big driver. Aftermarket or customer support, as we call it, and of course continuity of supply are also very important issues.
Do you see Britain as being just a location for small-scale specialists, or do you see large-scale manufacturing happening?
No, I don't see us just as being a place for SMEs, as we call it. We have a very strong SME market. I think it's fair to say that over the last 2 or 3 decades, we have seen a large number of British manufacturing assets being bought up. And therefore we do have an issue, and it would be wrong not to state it, that we do have an issue therefore that we do not have as many larger companies, say above 250 or 500 employees, as some of our other competitor nations. But, as I mentioned a moment ago, we have a very strong SME base, and one of our challenges here in the UK is to grow that base and make those companies substantially bigger and stronger.
What improvements would you make to the operating environment in Britain for manufacturing companies? Are there any changes to UK policy or the...
I think at macroeconomic level, and we can perhaps just drop a bit below that in terms of policy, at macroeconomic level, we, the government, various agencies and indeed ourselves have got to help create that environment where people, both British and overseas, wish to invest in the UK economy. I think if you just look at the detail of that, it's a predictable, stable tax system. It's got to be control, low regulation, flexible labour market, access to the skills that you referred to a moment ago, and so on. But the bottom line is, given the comment I made earlier about investment being mobile, it's making this marketplace as attractive as we can possibly make it.
Do you feel there's too much regulation, or that there isn't a stable tax environment?
With regard to regulation, I think every businessman would probably wish to make the claim that we are over-regulated. That said, I think in recent years we have seen a lot of regulation coming out, not just of Westminster, but out of Brussels. And I think there's a view that legislators perhaps perceive themselves to be there to legislate. And I think we've really got to be looking at this. There's now a very strong case, in my view, for just limiting and indeed reducing some of the legislation that we have got over the past few years.
Because when you talk about regulation, I mean, health and safety rules and things are there for a reason, aren't they?
Yes, indeed they are, and no one would question for a moment the need for robust health and safety regulations, indeed elements of other regulation. But if you look at the raft of regulation coming out, particularly coming out perhaps of the EU and Brussels, were we that bad a nation before we signed up to some of the European legislation? And I think our colleagues in government have now recognised, to be fair to them, that we can perhaps put the brake on some of the regulation coming out. I would particularly flag up employment regulation, and that, I think, in my view, is limiting what we call the flexible labour market. I think we want to get people back into work, and I think we should address this and address it quickly.
Well, Terry Scuoler, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.